invasion Russia doesn't want you to know about. John Harris.
I'm walking along one of the weirdest borders I've ever been to.
გამარჯობათ. ჟურნალისტები ვართ. ჯონი ჰარისი თორნიკე მანდარია. საშუ გვაქვს
They know Johnny Harris.
What's happening here is existential and people know it. What's at stake is the very existence of this country as a nation.
Russia's neighbour, Georgia, is closely watching what happens in Ukraine.
Hi. Hello. There's one Georgian woman whose house is just right here on the occupied side of the fence. Why do you stay here?
Okay. What do you mean, why?
There's something happening here that will affect the whole world. Here in this often forgotten country. Here, people are fighting for the future and soul of their nation.
One of the biggest demonstrations Georgia has ever seen.
Fighting against a much stronger opponent. I need to tell you their story because their story holds a lesson and a warning for us all. That lesson starts here, at this barrier that has been drawn into farmland and foothills against the will of these people.
The parents.
It appears the dogs have found a hole in the border and are not abiding by the Russian-occupied line.
This is a Russian dog.
This is a border that doesn't exist, or shouldn't exist, according to most of the world. If you zoom out, you'll see that on the map, this is a dashed line. Everyone else sees this as occupied territory. 20% of Georgia's land invaded and occupied by the Russian government and military. It's a line that almost no country in the world recognizes, but when you're here, there's a fence. There are signs that say that this is a border between two countries. And there are Russian outposts and military bases all over the place. There's one just right there.
They live near the border, on the Persian border.
She's telling us that she's decided to stay because when the Russians came here and occupied this territory, they wanted all this land, and this is her land.
And they got nowhere to go. No harm done, so the Russian outpost.
I'm looking across this line at a massive military complex. This is a Russian military base. It's one of dozens that dot this line. If I go any further this way, I'm crossing this little dashed line, and I will be in occupied territory where Russian forces feel comfortable snatching people. So I will not do that, but I will get my very long lens to get a better look at what's happening on the other side of this so-called border.
Петр I Северную войну, 21 год вел. Казалось бы, там воевал со Швецией, что-то отторгал. Ничего не отторгал. Ну, судя по всему, на нашу долю тоже, значит, выпало возвращать и укреплять.
Not actually invading, just taking back.
ტერიტორიაც ხო წაგვართვის, მაგრამ ღირსებად წაგვართვის რა. ჩვენი სიტუაციის შესახებ უნდა იცოდნენ, რომ არის ადგილი, სადაც რომ თქვენ უსამართლობა ზეიმობს. აი მორალურად გვიჭირს ძალიან ამის შეგვება, ამ უსამართლობის განცდის შეგვება.
Georgia is an old country. It's also really small. Look where it's located, right here between the Black and Caspian Seas, at the crossroads of the Middle East, Europe, and Russia. It's home to these stunning mountains and an old culture that is nestled into them. It's the birthplace of wine and the home to an ancient language and a people for whom hospitality and celebration are basically a religion, something any visitor will feel. But because of its location at this crossroads, Georgia has been conquered over and over.
Mongols, the Persians, the Ottomans, and then the Russians. And Russia has been the colonial power here for the last 200 years.
The Russian Empire then became the Soviet Union and took Georgia with it, ruling over the country until its collapse in the 1990s, at which time Georgia became an independent country, one that was tired of empires trying to control them. The people here wanted to move away from the Soviet and now Russian way of doing things. They wanted to move closer to the West, to join the European Union and the NATO military alliance.
We have experienced
How many Russians are in
Russia in
Georgia?
our skin, in our... you can't find any family in Georgia who has no relatives or ancestors who got killed or terribly treated by Russia.
But for Russia, NATO enlargement into former Soviet states felt like a threat, a geopolitical move to contain and weaken Russia. This led to one man rising to power, bent on not letting this happen. And in 2008, right after NATO had promised to let Georgia join, Russia invaded Georgia, sending its troops into these two divided parts of the country.
Tonight, Secretary of State Rice is calling on Russia to end its assault on the Republic of Georgia.
Kicking out the Georgian military and moving in their own, declaring these lands as independent from Georgia, countries that only Russia and a few of their allies recognize. Some call this the dress rehearsal for what Russia would later do in Ukraine. So Russia now occupies 20% of Georgia, its military inside of these lines that no one recognizes. These are the borders that I've been exploring.
We're now driving right along this line deep into a section that is surrounded by the occupied so-called border. There's Russian security around here and surveillance, and so we have a police
They're going with the police
escort to make sure we don't cross any boundaries, literally or figuratively, to upset the Russians. We don't want to mess with that. One of these villages that's right up on the line, right next to the occupied territory. It's a nice, peaceful community. I'm talking to the elders that are sitting around just watching life pass. There's a group of biking preteens that are just doing what boys on bikes do during the summer. This community has been affected by this line specifically because of this church that's up on this hill. It's their church, it's been their church for a long time, but when Russia drew this line, it went right here, cutting them off of access to this church. One night, some local guys had been drinking and they decided to go up, cross the line, and go into the church. They were being rowdy and cursing the Russians, and then Russian soldiers showed up and shot at them, killing one of them and arresting another. His death serves as a reminder of not only what was lost when this line was drawn, but the fact that there's violence here. There is an aggressive occupying force right here at the periphery of their village. And these people live in the shadow of that every day. It is their normal.
They might invade anytime.
Russia will sometimes come in and take more land here and there, showing that these borders are more of a suggestion, a bold-faced challenge to the sovereignty and independence of Georgia, a constant threat that is meant to make Georgia think twice about joining the West. As I was nearing the end of my time at the border zone, The police chief pulled over and pointed into the distance, deep into occupied territory. That was his village. This is all very personal for him.
Thank you so much.
Nice to
Oh,
have
you're
you
John
with us.
too?
Yes.
Ah, that's cool. Awesome. Thank you. I appreciate it.
The occupation is just one way the battle for the future of Georgia is playing out. But back in the capital, there's another front to this struggle, one that is heating up.
What's happening here is existential, and people know it. What's at stake is the very existence of this country as a nation.
I mean, there's nothing left but hope. Check this out. I'm now in front of the Georgian parliament. The city is really beautiful. I need to do a really important part of this video, which is thanking today's sponsor. I really wouldn't be able to tell this incredibly important story through today's video. There's a lot more to cover here. We're just getting started. Let's dive back in.
Okay, I'm back in the capital now.
Is he?
It's bustling, it's beautiful.
I came here to meet up with locals.
So it's a very instinctive knowledge, almost a generational, embedded in the DNA knowledge that we have.
Yeah.
And because we see the signs of that.
Many of them telling me that yes, 20% of the country is occupied, but there's something bigger happening here, something less visible, happening behind these walls. And it is threatening to allow Russia to once again swallow this small country.
I don't think Russia wants to physically take over Georgia. I think what Russia needs is a soft power takeover of Georgia. And I think this is what exactly they're working on.
Everyone I talk to has been out on the streets, fighting, chanting, being beaten up, and dancing about it all.
This was nothing like I had ever seen before.
I walked around the city with my new friend Ani, a local who's been showing me around Tbilisi's flea markets, where I found all kinds of relics from the Soviet days.
Can you ask how much these cost?
Including these old maps. I got to experience firsthand the Georgian proverb that every guest is a gift from God. I was the guest, and here's Ani secretly paying for this map.
As a gift for you.
Wait, what?
They will hang in my studio, and you will, as a reminder of your generosity.
Oh my God, that's so cool.
So there you go.
The first thing you have to understand here is that even though Georgia is so far east, over here next to Iran and squarely in Russia's backyard, most Georgians think of themselves as European.
Georgians always have identified as European. So there is a very deep affinity with the values that Europe represents.
I think Europe represents the life that you always dreamt of having as a kid.
I think in the West, a lot of people frame it as young Georgians out on the street because they want to be European.
No, we are European. European values are Georgian values to me, to be honest. Freedom is a Georgian value. It didn't come to us from Europe. It's
European?
not something that we discovered after the creation of EU.
If you want to understand the Georgian drive towards freedom in Europe, you need to understand the Georgian drive against and anti-Russia.
We are the generation that got to hear all the Soviet stories. It's something that our parents experienced. These are the stories of censorship. These are the stories of complete and utter restriction of any sort of personal freedom that an individual can have. It's almost this instinctive knowledge and a reaction, an instinct of fighting against that.
Turn in this city, there is imagery of the EU, of NATO.
In all the opinion poll that has ever been done by reputable organizations in this country is that more than 80% of Georgians want to join EU. This is a number that you will keep seeing because Georgian people are smart. Georgian people can differentiate between what Russia represents and what EU has.
The path towards the EU was going smoothly until recently, in a sudden and jarring shift.
Parliament approved a divisive bill that protesters say is a threat to the country's democracy.
Georgian lawmakers came out and said that they were passing a law that would require any organization that receives money from another country to register on a list. They would be deemed foreign agents. They'd be put on this list, and the government would have more power to scrutinize their operation, to regulate them.
Using this law, the government is basically suppressing the critical voices, suppressing independent media, labeling them as foreign agents, and including me.
A nearly identical law was passed in Russia about a decade ago. Just about transparency at first. But now that law, that foreign agent list, is now effectively the blacklist, where they will label organizations that they don't like or that are critical of them, and they will stigmatize them, and they will scrutinize them, and they will make life
johnnyharris on the list.
hard for them, bureaucratically and legally, under all of this technical details, and they'll shut them down, force them to flee. This has been one of the tools that the Putin regime has used to silence critics and to consolidate power over the country.
It truly is the Russian law. So we know what it does to what it can do to a society.
Now we see how hand by hand Georgian government and Kremlin are changing our path, our future.
People immediately felt betrayed.
This law is bringing back Georgia on the Russian side of the wall.
So suddenly, after a decade of preparing to join the EU and NATO, Georgian lawmakers are taking action to derail that path.
And it feels like a backstab, you know? Like, how come you can do this to your country, to your kids who are growing in this country?
Behaving in a way that looks a lot more like they're trying to perform for Russia. This law was sensitive, causing a brawl to break out
Russian propaganda.
Parliament. And it was also the spark that lit a fire for the Georgian people to fight back in a new way, pushing tens of thousands onto the street.
This is the first time I really realized that we were fighting.
Georgia's parliament is a fresh protest.
To be honest, it's been quite amazing. I have not been part of this type of protest before in Georgia. The levels of mobilization is huge. It's unprecedented, I would say, even.
I haven't seen such beautiful people in one space ever in my life, in any country. I've been in many places, but yeah, Georgian people are great.
It was our chance to protect for our history, for our next generation. I put everything on hold. I was there every day. It was like my second job, my second home.
And then suddenly you have the government that is vocally anti-Western. Yeah, it just really touched people, I think.
It's because they treat
And do they what? I don't get
us
it.
as though we're stupid, as though we don't understand
Maybe they don't.
the real implications and the real aim and purpose of the law.
I think it's more explosive because of how bold and blatant the kind of venture into authoritarianism is.
Yeah, like it's scary when they come at you. It's scary when your mask kind of goes off and you start suffocating.
Imagine a water cannon standing in front of the crowd of people. You see teenagers basically dancing in front of those water cannons.
Georgian people, I think, have the best sense of humor, and that's like their trauma response as well. Like whatever is happening in the country, we will always figure out a way how to make fun of it. So
They grab you, they take you in, and then inside, when there are no cameras, nobody to see you, they kick you extremely. At some point, I thought that they're gonna kill me or something. It's when they throw me on the ground, they call me slave of America. They take you, they apprehend you, they put you on the ground, and then like 10, 20 persons, they just grab you, kick you in the hand, in face. They're already insisting in face.
And they sexually mess up.
You know? And then, I'm sorry, and then they make fight. My dog becomes emotional when I tell this story. And they wait until your face becomes like swollen of beating, and then they take video or photo you and send to somebody.
And that question of like, Is this the night where I'm going to be killed?
Yeah.
Is this the night am I going to lose my eyeball?
Yeah.
Is this the night where I'm going to be harmed to that point where I cannot function as a human anymore?
Around this same time, a bunch of other countries that surround Russia, that are in Russia's sphere of influence, that are post-Soviet states, were discussing and passing this same kind of law. The blueprint, the playbook that the Kremlin has used to squash opposition, now being exported to Russia's sphere of influence.
It is a huge geopolitical win for Russia. They have essentially done what they failed to do in 2008 when they invaded Georgia. They have now captured the Georgian state.
My big question here was why? Why would the ruling party suddenly go against the will of 80% of the people to derail
They want to gain more power
Georgia's path towards Europe? Well, you have to remember
to compete against US.
where we're situated here. Georgia lives in Russia's shadow. Russia is their former colonizer. They already occupy much of the country, and they could easily invade again. Also, what you can't see here is that Georgia's economy is very reliant on Russia. For example, Georgia gets nearly all of their wheat flour from Russia. Georgia's neighbor Ukraine serves as a potent example of what happens when you draw too close to the West. But most people here don't buy it. They don't think these lawmakers are looking out for the country. The way they're acting makes it look like they are protecting themselves, their personal power, and financial interests, a lot of which are tied to Russia.
Who does it serve?
It serves those with money who also have power and who want to hang on to it. In our
They want to make more money, I guess.
case, it serves Bidzina Ivanishvili, the oligarch who is de facto ruler of Georgia. Yeah, the man who lives on top of the hill. He's the oligarch who made all his money in Russia.
Ivanishvili lives in this futuristic-looking mansion overlooking the capital, where he quietly pulls the strings on the country's politics, seemingly not based on what the people want, but based on what serves him and his allies, both in Georgia and Russia.
He is an oligarch who has made all of his billions in Russia in the 90s.
Yeah.
And when you do that, I mean, of course, you have some strings attached.
I feel anger because this is not their choice, you know? Like, this is the choice of our country, that we want the Western path, and we don't want to stick with Russia.
We want Europe, we want better values, we want our friend to be European Union, USA, not Russia and China. We don't want our government to
Oligarch is like a small group of people controlling our population.
decide for us.
Our
These
country.
people don't live with geopolitics being theoretical, something they read about in the news. They're on the front lines of the power struggle between big powers, and the future of their country relies on whether or not they can fight back.
I guess my last question is, are you hopeful?
Yes, I'm hopeful.
You are?
Yeah.
Why?
Why?
The hope is the only thing that we have left.
We are part of the European family, and one day I believe we will see each other as a European.
I think Georgians will prevail, you know. We are a society who has seen even wars and we prevailed, you know. So I think we will prevail. I hope so.
When you have such a network of social relations and so many people who are able to stand for their rights as citizens, I am very hopeful. I don't think it's easy to change that. Yeah.
Awesome. That's all I've got.
Yes.
Thank you so much.
Mr. Budanek, the speaker, in Chat Paul.